Today, first I want to talk about the vision. If you've been attending this church for a long time, you know that we are a hospitality church. The vision of Shepherd's Grove Presbyterian is to be a radically hospitable church that unchurched people love to attend. We want to be the kind of church where if somebody is visiting for the first time with their kids, they've never been to church before, that they leave here full of joy. That maybe they get a lot of hugs and handshakes and welcomes. We try to incorporate it into everything we do. We try to do it with the Dutch today. I hope you felt welcome. Goedemorgen. Ik vind het fijn om hier te zijn met mijn lieve vrouw Hannah. Ik wil koffie drinken. Ik wil bier drinken. Ik wil stroopwafels eten. Anyway, we're so glad you're here. I just told him I want to drink coffee, and I have like 3 phrases I know. I don't speak Dutch, but anyway. And we're just, so we try to do that the best way we can, and I just believe that every year I look at this church and this ministry in general, and I'm seeing a community of people that loves the other, that loves the stranger, that loves the one who maybe hasn't felt welcome in church. They go through some difficult time like a divorce or something like that, and they just feel embarrassed to go to church. Well, that should be the time you want to go to church the most. We want to be a part of a church. We want church to feel like the place you run to when you're hurting. It's not only a Shepherd's Grove value, it's a Christian value, and it's very deeply a Jewish value. Hannah read, the author of Hebrews 13, he or she says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Okay, remember, this is being written to a Jewish audience. The book is called what? Hebrews. Okay, good. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. Okay, in Greek and in Hebrew, this alerts not to just somebody you've never met before. It's an alien, an outsider, an immigrant, someone that maybe makes you feel uncomfortable, someone that looks different from you. By so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. This author, when he or she mentions this, is actually giving a hyperlink directly to the story of Abraham, which is the hospitality story for the Jewish people. Abraham is sitting in front of his tent, and he's under the great trees of Mamre. And I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's whittling something or reading something. But he's sitting out in front of his tent under the shade of a tree. And he sees 3 strangers. The rabbis make it sound like they're kind of off in the distance. And although you might read that he knows that they are, the rabbis teach that he didn't know who they were. He just saw 3 strangers in the distance. And the Bible says that he got up and ran after these strangers. Why? Why did he run after them? To welcome them into his tent. He said, friends, come to my tent, have a glass of water. And he washed their feet. And he had them sit down and join him under the shade of the tree. And he grilled them up a steak. That's true, it's in there. And he gave them milk and curds and was just incredibly hospitable to them because he's a desert person. And for whatever reason, this is the rock out of which the Jewish people were hewn. This is the quarry from which they were dug. They look to Abraham and they say, Abraham entertained these 3 strangers and had no idea that these were 3 angels, or that it was God and 2 angels, or however we interpret it, that it was the very real presence of God. We too should welcome the stranger, the alien, the foreigner, the person who's different than us, the person that may not feel comfortable in your church or whatever, that we ought to be hospitable towards these kinds of people. So in Judaism, hospitality, hold that on one hand, okay? Hospitality is a core value, maybe the core value. I mean, it's such a huge part of who they are as a people. On the other hand is another core value. The Hebrew word is kadosh. Kadosh we translate as holiness, that they want to be a holy people. They want to live according to the Torah rightly, that they enjoy debating what it means to honor the Sabbath or to love God with all your heart, etc. And they want to be different. The word holiness, though, really means to be separate. To be separate. So this is a very classic Jewish problem. In one hand, you have hospitality, which literally means to be welcoming people, to be with people, to be among people, to be eating with people, to be sharing company with people. Yet on the other hand, you have this word that means you need to be separate, you need to be different. Even to this day, if you see Orthodox Jews, they have all sorts of accoutrement they're wearing that they want it to scream that they're Jewish. You know, funny hats and things on their hands and arms and clothing and tassels and haircuts and things with their... This is because they're striving to be kadosh. They want to be separate. They want to be holy, so that when you see them, you can say, oh, this is the covenant people of God. And this has always sort of been an issue within Judaism, but in particular, in Jesus' day, because of the Pharisees and others, there is this lingering need to be holier more than to be hospitable. And this is the thing that Jesus' contemporaries are wrestling with. One of the biggest mistakes you can make when you read the Gospels is to group Pharisees together, however. Not all Pharisees agreed on what separateness meant. Pharisees argued with each other all the time, by the way. That was a normal thing to do. They didn't just argue with Jesus, they argued with each other. Perhaps you have a pretty good Jewish friend. Ask him if his Jewish family ever argues. Ask him if he ever argues with his friends. He might say something like, you know, the people you love are the people you argue with the most. So for us as a people, when we read, we have to understand that this is something that the group of people didn't agree on. Is to what level are we holy and to what level are we hospitable? Well, Jesus said, I have not come to abolish the law, but I have come to fulfill the law. Now that saying is not original to Jesus. That was a common idiom amongst rabbis. To abolish the law meant to teach something that wasn't true in the Torah. Did you catch that? But to fulfill the law meant to show what it meant to live according to God's purpose. In Jesus' fulfilling of the law, he is radically hospitable towards those that some of his contemporaries say, you don't associate with them. You don't touch them. You don't hang out with them. Don't be with them. And this is a big part of Jesus' life. So, for example, Jesus converted Matthew the tax collector to become a disciple. Or the story of Simon the leper, eating with a leper. You're not supposed to do that. Or sitting at the well with the Samaritan woman. You know, so Jesus is sitting and drinking and talking to not only a Samaritan woman, but a divorced Samaritan woman. You know, imagine the Zacchaeus story. You know, the wee little man climbs into a tree. This is a guy that probably stole from everybody. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But he was perceived as a villain, and Jesus said, I'm going to eat with you. Huge honor. So as Jesus is doing this, he has this small guild of disciples. And in those days, to be a disciple meant, I want to become just like the rabbi. A disciple was usually a young man between 15 years old and in some cases mid-20s. So they were all, late high school, early college aged boys, really. Peter was probably 23 or something. And these guys desperately wanted to live holy, good lives, and they wanted to be like Jesus, like the rabbi, the best way they could. And so Jesus would then eat with these people who are not holy, who are not, insiders. They're not the best of the best. And they would feel sort of embarrassed sometimes. I remember once they say, Jesus, don't you know who that woman is? You can't be eating with her. You're not even supposed to say that to your rabbi. They're really... So now it's been 3 years, and these young men have become more and more like Christ, and they've spent time with him, and they've shared meals with him, and they've never left his side. And now Jesus is about to give them what some call the stone lecture. It's the final sort of big teaching he's going to give before he goes to the passion and the cross. And he takes these boys, these 12 guys, and he walks up to a very small area called Caesarea Philippi. Now, for the contemporary reader, when you say Caesarea Philippi, all of this stuff comes to your mind. But for them, for us, when we read it, it's just like, it's Caesarea Philippi, whatever. I'm going to tell you a bit about this. So they walk. Most of Jesus' ministry happened within 3 square miles around the Sea of Galilee. He almost never left that space. In this case, he takes these guys on a 28-mile walk north to a place called Caesarea Philippi. And they arrived at this place. Now, the first thing you want to know, this town, it was conquered by Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great conquered the world, he didn't just take it over. He converted people. So he came in and built gymnasiums and theaters and taught people Greek, and he built temples. And it was in Caesarea Philippi that Alexander the Great built the Vatican version of a worship center for the god Pan, who in the winter they would go to a damp, dark place called Sheol. Sheol we sometimes translate as hell, but in the Jewish mind in those days, it wasn't fire and brimstone, it was water and dripping and darkness and cold. Hades is this way too, where it's this underworld that's full of water. And they believed that any time there were large openings of water, that these were sort of gateways in and out of hell. So the Sea of Galilee, for example, was a huge space of, where like if you fell deep enough, like if you went deep enough in the Sea of Galilee, you'd like fall through into Sheol. Does that make sense? So like when the pigs that are possessed by demons run into the Sea of Galilee, that totally makes sense because in their mind it was like, well, they're going back to hell. This space that you see behind me in Caesarea Philippi is a large tunnel grotto. There was an earthquake, so it's not as open as it used to be, but it used to go way, way back, and water would come gushing out of it all the time. It's the head, actually, of the Jordan River. And this was called the gates of Sheol, or the gates of Hades. Everybody say gates of Hades. So in those days, this was called the gates of Hades in Caesarea Philippi. They believed that that's where Pan would go in and out of Hades, and this became the center of worship for him. Next to the gate of Hades is a place called the Rock of the Gods. Everybody say the Rock of the Gods. They believed that Pan would come in his weirdness. Pandemonium, demonium is a demon. And Pan also, the word in Greek, it means all, but it comes from the god Pan because of his many personifications. So it's this very, very dark place. And if you imagine these young men who, they're like so straight-laced. These are how these guys are. They just grew up. Everything is clean. They can't even touch somebody with dandruff without going through some ritualistic cleansing. So everything is about being clean. And here they are in this space where something that is the most opposite of what they believe that is utterly evil and sad, he brings them to this place. As they're there, Jesus then looks at Peter, or looks at the group, and he says, all right, who do people say that I am? There's some muttering among them. What should we say? They look back and forth. Someone speaks up and says, some say you're John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. Some are saying Jeremiah. And he looks at them and he says, who do you say that I am? Peter, as the oldest, is the sort of leader of the group. He's the oldest of them, so he has to always speak on behalf. And very boldly, Peter looks at Jesus and says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. The Greek really seems to highlight this word living. He's quoting Hosea here and other passages, but it's like he's saying that our God is alive and this God is dead. Jesus says a common Jewish idiom, which is the greatest compliment that you can give a disciple if you're a rabbi, and he says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And then he says something else. Okay, so where are they? They're looking at Pan, at the Rock of the Gods, next to the gate of Hades. Okay, this is important to remember. We as Westerners, we think in abstracts. We use words like omniscient and omnipresent and things like that, right? Jews don't use these words to describe God. They use words like God is a shepherd, God is a rock, God is a tower, God is a house, God is a mother hen. Jesus looks at them, standing in front of the gates of Hades and the Rock of the Gods, and he says, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Now, our Catholic friends and brothers and sisters say that this is Jesus charging Peter with authority over the church. And you know what? They're right. It is. And we Reformed folks say this is Jesus commemorating Peter's declaration of faith, his doctrine. And that's the rock. And you know what? They're right, it is. But what if there's also a third thing here? Where Jesus, the Jewish rabbi, when he says, you, Peter, which means rocky, Peter means rock. He says, you, Peter, and on this rock, the rock of the gods. You see what's happening down there? This is where you build the church. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Powerful symbolism. And then you read further on and it says, Jesus then called to the crowd, and the Bible says a loud voice. In Greek, it probably should be shouted. He looks at them, at all of these people who are down there in this muck and in this mire, and he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. And then an even louder voice, what good is it if someone gains the whole world and loses their own soul? What can you get for the loss of your soul? You just imagine that, and just these people stopping and looking up and seeing this crazed 33-year-old rabbi with this thing over his head and his students, and standing there shouting over them, what will you gain from this? And it's almost like they're embarrassed. And he looks at the 12 and he says, if anyone is ashamed of me or of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory and with his holy angels. Powerful, powerful, powerful moment by the greatest teacher to ever live, Jesus Christ. On this rock, build my church here. This is your problem. This is where you need to go. Stop being so afraid of being straight-laced. Be proud of me. Be honoring of me. Don't forget me. But go here. These people need you. They need you. People do this when they're broken. People do this when they have nowhere else to go. People do this when they're empty. They need you. We serve a rabbi who goes to outsiders. What if there's someone that God is asking you today to be deliberately hospitable towards? Someone that maybe you're the only way they're going to experience the love of God today, or maybe it would be the first time they've ever received a touch from God. I just want to encourage you that if you begin to be like Abraham, we have eyes to see the passers-by, to welcome them, to run after them, to invite them, to serve them and care for them and love on them. Watch how God can use that to dramatically change their life and change your life. We serve a God who does not want us to stay cloistered up in church buildings. He does not want us to stay in Jerusalem. He wants us to go into all the world and make disciples. It is so crystal clear that this is what Jesus wants from us, is to be goers and doers and reachers. Even when we were sinners, even when we were lost, he came after us. So we continue in our church and in our power to create a community of hospitality people. Amen? And that's who you are. I'm so proud of you. You're doing such a good job. And continue to reach people who feel like they're outsiders or forgotten. Be holy. Pursue your life after God. Live according to your convictions. But also remember, we're called to go. Amen?